Again, I want to welcome everyone to our lecture this morning. And our lecture today is Life in a Permanent Warm Front, the Future of Building and City Design. In our series of lectures this season, we have explored, this is the wrong slide. Excuse me. In our series of lectures this season, we have explored how a number of artists from different time periods have responded to their environment and/or how they have captured the particular places in which they lived. Today, we look forward to a future which probably will arrive much sooner than we expect, to learn about how everyone, not just artists, will likely experience the environment as shaping both the design and function of the buildings in which they live and work, as well as new concepts of city design. Humans currently face urgent and difficult challenges, including rapid population growth, the perpetual decline of our arable land and natural resources, climate change, and environmental destruction. We have more opportunity than ever to create a better world through technology and our increasing connectedness. Our guide on our journey today is Lee Bey, who fell in love with the city, initially Chicago, and particularly its architecture, at an early age. He is now a photographer, writer, lecturer, and consultant who documents and interprets the built environment, and often the complex political, social, and racial forces that shape space and place. His writings on architecture and urban design and his documentary photographs have been featured in prominent magazines and many news outlets. And I show you his most recent book, Southern Exposure, The Overlooked Architecture of Chicago's South Side, on the screen. Bey is currently senior lecturer at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and an adjunct professor at Illinois Institute of Technology, also in Chicago. Now, to share just some of his relevant previous work experience, after graduating from Columbia College Chicago with a degree in journalism, Mr. Bey became the architecture critic for the Chicago Sun-Times. He served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Urban Planning under former Chicago Mayor Richard M. Daley. Next, he joined the Chicago office of the architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill as Director of Governmental Affairs, advising on urban design issues. Mr. Bey is former Executive Director of the Chicago Central Area Committee, a civic group composed of business and cultural leaders devoted to improving the architecture, transportation, cultural life, and urban design of downtown Chicago. He was Associate Director of External Affairs and Special Projects for the University of Chicago Arts and Public Life Initiative. He sat on Mayor Rahm Emanuel's Blue Ribbon Committee for the Chicago Climate Action Plan. And as Vice President of Planning, Education, and Museum Experience at the DuSable Museum in Chicago, Mr. Bey oversaw the museum's education department, collection staff, and exhibitions, as well as several strategic initiatives and museum planning projects. Mr. Bey has been described as one of Chicago's keenest observers of architecture and urban planning. In his lecture today, Mr. Bey will examine a range of projects and plans for buildings that naturally cool themselves, recycle existing materials, are protected from rising floodwater, and in other ways allow us to live and work in sustainable and environmentally responsible ways. I will get off and please welcome Mr. Lee Bey. You'll need to unmute. There you go. And
thank you.
You should be spotlighted and able to share your screen whenever
All right.
you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. Good morning, everyone. This is hopefully a good talk. As Kristen set it up perfectly, we are looking at a present and a future in which the built environment will need to change in order to adjust to issues caused by global warming. And we can debate, for years what's causing it, why it's happening. But the fact is, it is indeed happening. and we have to change, and we are changing as societies, the way we build. So the built environment's response to this incredible change is important. So we're going to look at some projects around the world, a couple in Chicago, that try to take on this task, building differently, planning differently, as an answer to this. So with that, let me share my screen. I always get this wrong here. Oh, okay. Whoops. There we go. So the title, of course, as nicely set up by Kristen, is Life in a Permanent Warm Front, the Future of Building and City Design. And again, a permanent warm front is exactly where we're headed as a planet. We see it already, where places that are, invasive species of animals and sea life, I should say, and plants and other things that you may have seen in the tropics or near the tropics, are slowly beginning to creep north as the planet warms. So we're seeing a lot of different evidence of what's happening. So these next figures are from NASA, right? So this documents the ice mass in Antarctica, and the drop is symbolizes how much we're losing every year, every 5 years, because the Earth is warmer. And so we lose about 151 billion metric tons per year of ice mass in Antarctica, a huge amount. Of course, that causes seas to rise and other problems that we begin to see. As pointed out here, from 1900, to 2020. You can see the substantial rise of sea level in the world as these places melt, glaciers melt, ice caps begin to melt. It makes the seas rise, and of course that contributes to flooding and other things that we see and have been seeing around the world. So the planet is going to do things just by nature, right? I mean, storms and these floods and all this kind of stuff. It's just the way that the planet does. But those issues are exacerbated greatly when you see this kind of uptick. I mean, just look at that. I mean, just alone in this millennium, how far it's leaped up. Almost double. I was born in 1965, right? So, so it's doubled since then, and will only likely increase unless we do something to reduce the way we as humankind, warm the planet. Again, more another look at in this case the oceans. I mean, the levels rising, and for all the things that we've just been talking about. So what is the built environment's response to this? So we're going to, again, look at some things, just sort of quick trip around the parts of the globe to look at what's happening. And here's a project that's coming online sort of in the future in 2020, 2022. This is WeBank by SOM. It's in Shenzhen, China, and it's 31-story bank. It's a privately owned digital only bank. But what's interesting about it is that they've included public spaces or open spaces, terraces, places where the building can begin to cool itself, where daylight can come in, where there's natural ventilation. So rather than having a building work against the climate, right? And we all have been in the old school office buildings when you have to jam the air conditioner on and in the summertime, and then flip around in the wintertime to put the heat on. The building is fighting, it's combating itself. It's combating against the environment by building a building that's more harmonious with the environment, that allows in breezes when you need them, that can block sun naturally when it needs to be blocked. And of course, by doing that, reduces thermal gain. Again, by putting a building more in harmony with nature, it burns less energy, it makes the building more comfortable. And these are the things that begin to combat, hopefully, the issues that we're talking about. To do this takes a level of technology, of course, that luckily we're able to get. The plants on the inside are lignin plants, which are native to the area, help provide shading, help provide cooling, all of this stuff. Low E glass, that allows less heat in through by the sun. There's a rooftop garden. I don't show that will allow rainwater to be harvested to help irrigate the building. So these are the kind of things that companies can do, that architects, of course, know how to do, that again can begin to help set things right. I mean, this is one building, but you can imagine, for instance, if a set of office buildings, a downtown, if you will, were built this way, the benefits that could possibly come. So it's one thing for a bank, which has all the money in the world, to be able to build a building like this. But what happens where many of us live, particularly with the issue of affordable housing? Here's one in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that is a multifamily a residential unit, opened in 2007. It has LEED Platinum status, so it's at the top, near the very top of this certification, the certification standards that decide how green a building is. What I read is that this building is 72% more energy efficient than its similar buildings that are built more conventional ways. The tenants are paying $22. I should move here. The tenants are paying $22 a month to heat and cool their apartments, significantly less. And again, Boston isn't like Florida, so there's some climate to deal with. People who have moved here, at least according to the landlord, because the way the building is ventilated and open, people who have moved here who have had respiratory problems have found those problems have lessened a bit by living here. So here is a solution for that addresses the issues that we're talking about. Again, not built by a bank or an office building, but again, affordable housing. And if we're going to make a dent in this locally, nationally, globally, this is really where the rubber meets the road, right? Being able to build like this at a level that most of us and many of us live. Here's an interesting thing. This is in Abu Dhabi, which of course is in the desert, Middle East, extremely hot. And these are cooling stations, proposed cooling stations there in Abu Dhabi. So you can see it's almost based on kind of like a kind of a palm trees sort of there, and the idea being that these man-made pieces will allow misting water, of course, block the sun, and kind of provide this thermal comfort in the desert. Very much an oasis, literally, in homage to the traditional oasis, like this place in the desert where you can go find water and coolness. We've got to build them themselves. So mists come from those little nodes under the palms, as you can see. And again, it blocks the sun. It's kind of tree-like structures. This is a way where parks and open space can play an important role in helping keep us cool and in cooling the planet as well. The less you can do away with hard space, the less you can do away with many of these things, provides a coolness, allows the ground not to radiate heat and contribute to the problems that we're talking about. It's actually kind of good looking too. And there's the look from up top, and you can see obviously a mix of man-made shade, natural shade, all together there. Now, another way to get at this is to consider, what do we do with existing buildings? You know, the most green thing that you can do is not to demolish a building, not to fill it up with landfill, not to let it fill a landfill. All the energy and the carbon, the carbon footprint that expands when you're demolishing the building. If you can leave a building in place and restore it, refurbish it, modernize it, then that is a good thing. So one of the more significant ones of this decade, or decade and a half, I guess, would be the the United Nations retrofit. This is a $1.6 billion project to modernize the UN, of course, one of the most recognizable buildings in the world. The project began in 2007, and one of the centerpieces of it is, of course, the Secretariat Tower, which is the building that you see here. This is the image that we see in our mind when we think of UNs, or when we think of the UN, or when movies have establishing shots of the UN, they focus on this building. And what has happened here is that there's been a program throughout the entire program to reuse, to retrofit, and to repair and to renovate the UN structure, the UN complex, to use reusable materials to avoid waste, to keep the carbon dioxide, make sure that the process doesn't contribute greatly to the carbon dioxide that's in the air. What's happened here with the Secretariat is that they reglazed the entire building, so that it now it consumes 50% less energy than it did in its previous state with its previous glass face. Emits 45% fewer greenhouse gases. The floor plans were revised to create more circulation of air and people around it. Lighting was changed. Lighting is huge. So lighting was changed. There are motorized blinds and shades, all kinds of things to help make this 1950s building function better in the 21st century. And this is a signature project for this kind of retrofit. I mean, so you can imagine around the world, UN facilities, other governmental facilities, that are looking at this and taking in the cues from this. Even small things like eliminating glare from all that glass, sun glare, and to make sure that the new glass does that. And so there is not only a environmentally sensible, there's not only an environmental benefit to this, which is enough, which is fantastic to have, but also contributes to the comfort of the workers inside. Now, here's an interesting project out of Singapore. When we think about hospitals, particularly in the 19th century and the early 20th century, many of them embraced nature. They were built around courtyards. The windows were operable. There was a sense that the healing process, there was a sense the healing process, one benefit of it, in addition to whatever medical science could provide, would be exposure to fresh air and outdoors. Here in Chicago, for instance, if you could ever see images of the first Cook County Hospital, not the old one that got retrofitted a few years ago, but the one that was demolished to build the 1910 County Hospital building, it looks very much like a giant apartment building with open space and green space. We even as recently as the 1940s, with the plan for Michael Reese Hospital, now demolished, here on the South Side, where there were gardens and an open space, and of course views of the lake. All that was part of the curative process. So here with this hospital in Singapore, this general hospital in Singapore, you have kind of a return to that, as hospitals around the world are beginning to look at natural light and ventilation and green space, and to be able to view green as an important part of the healing process. This is by the firm HOK. It's a naturally ventilated hospital. 70% of it is naturally ventilated. So 82% of the patient beds have access to natural ventilation. The hospital, compared to other hospitals, its size uses 38% less energy than a typical hospital. And they're saying also 69% less energy than a US hospital. And, obviously we all know if we can, the energy manufacturing process is one that's often ruinous to the environment. If we can make a building do much of this work on its own naturally, that's less fuel we have to produce and spew whatever we were spewing into the atmosphere to produce fuel. It just, again, sets the building in harmony with nature, makes it work. It makes it have to work less and pollute less in order to give us the comforts that we need. Here's another view of the hospital. I apologize for the blurry picture, but coming out on these terraces, you can imagine how wonderful that must feel, and how different it is to the kind of the classic hospital experience that we often have in this country and in other countries, where you're sort of locked in this room. I shouldn't say locked, where you're enclosed in this room. The windows don't open. Everything is beige, to look at. And there's this kind of low-grade industrial hum that you have to kind of put up with if you listen real closely, and compare that to this, where there's light and air and green and views. All of that is a beautiful thing. I'm actually going through these faster than I thought. This is interesting, and and this will be good for us to talk about, because as we as a country, as a world, kind of grapple with these issues. Some things, some may be missteps. Some may be works in progress. So this is a bicycle lane that runs down the middle of this highway in South Korea. And the roof of the bicycle lane, the roof is photovoltaic cells. I think it's about 20 or 25 miles of this. So, and so the photovoltaic cells and the structure for them provides a covered bike path for those who are riding their bikes here. On the one hand, it's fantastic. It makes better use of the median that separates opposing lanes of traffic. I personally don't know how comfortable it would be to ride your bike next to an expressway. Seems to me that would be kind of noisy. The connections to it, by the way, are underground, so the bicycle riders aren't having to cross these roads to get to it. But here's a way at least to adjust roads, which of course, concrete, asphalt for roads, particularly in this country and other countries, also, it takes up a lot of space. There's a lot of energy that's created, that's expended to create them. Of course, when it gets hot, they radiate heat. So there is this desire, as these movements begin to go forward, to do something to adjust the roadway to make it more sustainable. So I'd like to hear your comments actually on what do you think about this? What do you think about putting a bicycle lane in the middle of this? A little closer to home. In fact, in my case, very close to home. This is the Method Soap Factory here in Pullman, the Pullman community in Chicago. If you know Chicago, it's at 111th Street, just west of the Bishop Ford, used to be the Calumet Expressway on the far south side. What's been interesting over the past 10 years or less about this part of the city is that this, of course, was one of the industrial hearts of Chicago. This is where the far south and southeast side, this is where our paint companies were, steel mills, all these kind of things, that provided jobs and income, but were often ruinous to the environment, spew things into the air, pour things into the ground that we're still grappling with. Not far from here, 20 blocks south of here, is the Altgeld Gardens housing project, which is, further into this kind of Calumet region that we're talking about. And it's a public housing project that was built on an asbestos dump that they didn't clean out. And so there's that, and it's surrounded by, it was surrounded by all kinds of factories and incinerators and things which poison the air and poison the water, particularly in the 20th century. Barack Obama, as a community organizer, comes to Chicago to, it makes his bones, if you will, protesting against what was called the toxic donut that encircled all Yale Gardens and much of the far southeast, the far south and southeast side. As these industries went away, then the land sort of sat there, and and not having a factory on it, oftentimes didn't make it any less harmful. So what's happened here is that on this old brown field on 111th Street, west of the Bishop Ford Expressway, the Method Soap Factory was constructed, I guess around 7 years ago. And you can see from the image here, there's photovoltaic cells solar cells that provide energy to the plant. There's wind turbines. These things went up so fast. I catch the nearby Metro train downtown one early morning a couple of years ago, and I see these things in the distance, and I think, I've gone crazy. There's no way I'm looking at a wind turbine turning. And of course I was. Method Soap, if many of you use this, is this environmentally safe product. So the product and the architecture kind of become joined one and become a joint mission, if you will. That green space that you see to the right of the photograph is a bioswale designed to capture the rainwater that's on the site, and through those native plantings, of course, which weren't there, completely there when the building was built and are planted and maintained, releases the rainwater and stormwater slowly back into the system. So, it helps to mitigate the flooding, and, there's from the rain and stormwater runoff and all those kind of things. Since this photograph was taken, after I took this photograph, there's a company that's here on the site, Gotham Greens, which has created a rooftop space, I think, atop this building on the far right side there, where they grow greens, that you can eat. So this used to be the Ryerson Steel Factory part of it, and to see it industry, fail and walk away, the brown field that was there, toxic in many cases, lie fallow for 20, 30 years. Now to see it come back to life with industry that provides jobs, but does so in a way that helps the environment, or at the very least mitigates the damage that industry can cause the environment, is a fantastic thing. And you're going to see more of this, I think, in urban areas and the outskirts of urban areas where there's land to do things like this. Here's another example. This is a green roof, and we all know the green roofs can do tons of work in terms of making buildings cooler, the buildings that's underneath them cooler. This is a green roof that belongs to a company called Omni Ecosystems here in Chicago. And they took an old milk factory on the south side, I don't know how many square feet, but it's pretty big. And they put their headquarters inside of it. They make this kind of engineered rooftop garden, things like trees and plants and other things. And they sort of made their headquarters, their laboratory for their work. So all of this is new. We're 2.5 stories, I guess, above 43rd and State, if you know Chicago. And there's a moderately rolling topography with this, a walkway that goes through. They built this to the left, to the right there. You see this small kind of glass building that's there, that's atop the building that overlooks the garden. Here's a view of the glass building and the garden next to it, skylights. That's the little hump there you see toward the middle of the photograph to the right, cut into it. And they do great business. I mean, people are coming to them wanting this product atop their buildings, or the products that they make atop their buildings, because people are beginning to see the benefit of all of this When I worked in City Hall 20 years ago, and there's a rooftop garden on Chicago City Hall, the City Hall and County Building, as many of you may know, is one building together. And the City Hall side is on the west, and the County Building side is on the east of this one building. And the experiment was to build a green roof on the west side over the City Hall side, but not to build one over the county side, and to see the benefits. And the City Hall side was cooler, it required less energy, all those kind of things. So there's a bottom line to all this financially as well, which has to be remembered. And as technology improves and the way to build these things become cheaper, the labor becomes more manageable, you're going to see this kind of response to things. Lastly, the best mechanism to kind of institutionalize and to spread this kind of the kind of things we're talking about is through policy, governmental policy. So cities, states, in some respects, the federal government, and of course in other countries, especially Germany, as we saw, Singapore, England, are beginning to have already started to institutionalize certain goals, and so codified them into law and practice. So the city of Phoenix, hot as all get out in the summertime, if you've ever been there, of course. The idea is to make it a carbon neutral city by 2016. And then some of these things are, the kind of goals there. So to have this desert city take on this is incredible. So, gardens and pathways, parks and greenways in every neighborhood. And we know the cooling effects that those have. 300 miles of pathways and walkable and vibrant canals, allowing nature to cool us better, 80 to 90% reduction in emissions. Everyone walking within 5 minutes of a park or a parkway. So you're not getting in your car to drive to a park or a green space. It's there in front of you. And of course, transit in every neighborhood. All of these things are together. And what's interesting about all of this is that it's almost like, in a sense, if you'll indulge me in the comparison, it's almost like the moment that we're in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, where the things that we call for as a society, even globally as a society, go far beyond just police injustice, but a look at justice of all kinds, right? Environmental justice, all kinds of justice. And here, there's something similar here, which is that when you call for a better functioning world, better functioning city, environmentally better functioning city, you kind of get these interesting offshoots. So as part of this plan for Phoenix, in addition to keeping us cooler and closer to green space, you'll notice at the bottom of the screen that they want a vibrant food system. They want to eliminate food deserts. So there become these interesting linkages between these kind of long-term problems that many neighborhoods and cities have had and this relatively new thing. Here in Chicago, policy can come down to this kind of thing. Again, we talked earlier about roads and how they can contribute to the issues that we're talking about. So here are ways to kind of mitigate that issue. So permeable pavement is a plus, where you have on the right side, on the left side of the image there, page, you have impermeable pavement, right? Water, it rains, whatever, the water stands there, it maybe rolls into the sewers, or maybe it just mounts up and winds up in your basement. Compare that to permeable pavement, where the water when it rains, the water can collect and slowly release itself back into the ground. We've done in Chicago some alleys this way, particularly under Richard M. Daley, and a bit under Rahm Emanuel. This is the kind of thing I'd like to see get picked up and continued more in Chicago. We also look at the way the pavement reflects the sun. We've all been walking across an asphalt parking lot down a wide street on a hot day, and you can feel the heat of the sun radiating from the bottom, as well as the top. So to be able to recoat roads in Los Angeles. There's an initiative to paint many roads white so they reflect the color, don't absorb all that, so that they reflect the heat, so they don't absorb all the heat for all the day and then release it and make the place hotter than it normally would be. So all this stuff again reduces heating costs. It helps keep urban vegetation surviving and not wilting by the roadside, and of course improves air quality. So all these things are important. So with that, I guess we've reached the end, and I'd like to maybe open things up and kind of discuss some of the issues that we're talking about.
Okay, I'm trying to end the spotlight on me, and here we go. People should be, I do have some questions, and people should be able to eventually unmute themselves. One comment at first was when you first started talking, one of our participants, Kathy Knapp, thought of Monticello, which Jefferson designed to naturally cool through just from the construction.
That's a good point.
There was a question when you were talking about roof gardens. Who plants and cares for those generally, and at what cost?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they become part of the building maintenance, particularly when buildings are built from the ground up this way. They just become part of there's a crew that takes care of this. In the case of City Hall, it was the same. There was just, a crew that took care of it. But much of it, it doesn't require this kind of high-end manicuring of lawns. I mean, if you plant with natural species, and there's obviously planting that goes into it, the places almost kind of take care of themselves in a large way. So it isn't like people are coming up there with lawnmowers and hedge clippers all the time. The place kind of grows, as you can see with the bioswale next to the Method Soap Factory. It kind of reaches a state, right? And it kind of takes care of itself in a way, in some ways.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let me see. Another question. Actually, where does Abu Dhabi get its water?
Where does Abu Dhabi now? See this. I figured someone was going to ask me that question. I'm gonna take a stab in the dark to say that some of this is piped in. That if there are any aquifers beneath the ground, it probably comes from that. But I'm going to guess that since they're already piping in water to that region, it wouldn't be so much of a big lift to be able to put some to have the offshoot that can feed these oases as well.
Okay, thank you. I did want to remind our listeners, you mentioned when you were speaking about the Method Soap project with the bioswale, collecting the rainwater and then putting it back into the ground in a environmentally safe way. I want to remind our participants that Peoria Riverfront Museum also built a bioswale along the backside, so the water doesn't go into the storm sewer system, but it is filtered and goes back into the ground.
That's a good point. I didn't get into this, but Peoria also has a sustainable plan that's pretty good. I didn't read into it in extensive detail, but at least want to know the room in case it came up. And this is the kind of thing that we're talking about. Cities, particularly cities of this size, can do so much to help this issue.
That's good to know. And I was wondering, what are some of the easiest things that maybe are the first things that a community might do or a planner might do in a new building construction or city design?
I think that one good early and affordable thing is increasing the amount of trees, the tree canopy. Of course, it takes a while for the tree to come into maturity, but those years pass by faster than you think. Also, thinking about, for instance, what we plant along the parkways. We still plant in Chicago pretty conventionally. So there's these kind of Kentucky green grass that we plant here, which is not really of the area, so it requires the kind of maintenance that one of the commenters talked about. But things are changing because it used to be if you planted wild grass in your lawn, people would come to you. They were like, "Man, cut your grass." I mean, they thought that you weren't taking care of it. Now people begin to understand. So those are the kind of things I think on the first step that can be done. And cities plant grass in these parks, in these parkways. They plant the trees there. They're doing this work anyway. So to be able to just change what they do and do it this way as opposed to that way is a good thing.
Kay Koch has mentioned that Indianapolis also has quite a few LEED buildings and bioswales. And David Colglazer asks, are there model building codes that can be used or adopted to instill modern ideals that you have outlined?
You know, I think Phoenix would be good to look at. You know, I want to say Chicago, but I'm beginning to wonder that I think that and if someone from Chicago is on, correct me, but I think that we've got to the vision plan stage, right? Of saying, well, here's what we want to do as a city conceptually. But I think a lot of it hasn't really boiled down to the building codes yet, where you're required to do this and you're required to do that. But maybe that's coming.
Well, I wondered too, how is a lot of this client driven or architect firm driven? Can the architectural firms make the decision that they want to make this change and work in these new environmentally responsible ways, or do they need to wait for a client to encourage it and ask for it?
Good question. You know, I think that in architecture firms are so good at this, at providing solutions. So if a building or if a developer comes to them and says, look, I want to build this 32-story building, but good Lord, have you checked the rates for heating these things lately? I mean, I'm just making this conversation up. Then an architecture firm can then suggest these kind of fixes to say, listen, if you want to burn less energy, you want to do less this, you want to have less that, here's a sustainable approach to do it in. And what was the second part of your question? I think I lost you. I think I lost it.
Oh, well,
is it client driven or?
Yes. Is it client? Is it more client driven or more firm driven?
You know, I think a lot of clients are pushing forward. More now than, let's say, even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when I first started writing about architecture. It's kind of interesting sea change that's kind of happening with what younger workers in their 20s and 30s who are in the workforce now, what they require from their employer in ways that when I was in my 20s and 30s that you didn't think of. And people seem to want to work for a place that has a mission that embraces these kind of things. So to win workers, I think at the old post office building downtown Chicago, if you know the city, this is the building that famously straddles the Eisenhower Expressway. Old post office, the Postal Service moved from there, I don't know, 25 years ago. The building was kind of a white elephant that's there. And now it isn't. Actually, we could have done a whole talk about that building by itself. And the companies that are going there, there's a vibrancy, there's a youthful vitality that's there. And a lot of it is driven by the workers, and the workers that are coming there, they want to work at a sustainable place. So it's interesting how all this kind of stuff gets together. That developers and employers are responding to this need more so than they did maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Well, somewhat of a follow-up to that comment, Ed Berry, who is a local architect here, asks, is the Method Soap Factory performing as designed and built, and how has it impacted nearby Pullman and its historic district?
No, good point. I was there at the Method Soap Factory in November of 19 and asked that very question, and they tell me yes. I guess if it were no, would they tell me? But they tell me yes. And I guess the success is that the campus is being added on to with the Gotham Greens as well. It's interesting now. It's part of the Pullman Landmark District. It's within the Pullman. Well, it's within the Pullman neighborhood, but it's set off enough from the Landmark District where you really can't see actually you can see the neighborhood from the factory, particularly some of those near the rooftop, but you can't really see the factory from the neighborhood, which is kind of strange. But they've been a great neighbor. I mean, if you live in Pullman and you go there, they will give you free soap, which as a single man, I should take advantage of more, but they'll give you free soap and their products. There's a room you go in there and they give it to you. they reactivated, or they activated a train line, which is kind of interesting. So there's a, this is like there's a, Southeast Chicago, far South Chicago was like this home of lots of rail lines, many of them that went dormant. But now they have shipments in and out of the factory. So there's a train that comes 2 or 3 times a day. And I don't know why, but many neighbors I've talked to, including, and I feel the same way, they like that. It makes the neighborhood, which is, again, we're 15 miles south of downtown, it makes it feel more active to have that train coming through. But long story short, they've been good for us. They've attracted more industry to that area, and they're good neighbors.
We have several more good questions coming along. Here's one about permeable pavements. Are they best used only in hotter or drier areas of the country? How does the application work in areas like central Illinois, where the roads are subject to heaving and the hardware they receive from scraping and salting in the winter?
I think that that's a good question. I think that in response to that, it may not be that you can, at this point, affordably do a large road, a large long road or highway, build one this way, but you can do less demanding roads like alleys, like sidewalks, like driveways, or at least the lip of the driveway, that goes out into the public realm a bit. I mean, there's ways. I think that's probably more doable. I think as technology improves, like for instance, the permeable roads. Oh, certainly, and certainly vacant lots. I mean, parking lots. My goodness. I mean, there's a place where the big box has a parking lot. What feels like an infinity amount of acres in front of it of surface parking. That's an area where this can be done. So, I'm thinking, and again, I'm not an engineer. I'm thinking it might be tougher. It's a great question to do a big highway this way to make it permeable, but the actual roadbed permeable, given the demands of it. But I think there's these other places next to the road, access roads, service drives, where you could do it and still be able to reap a difference.
We have at least one local church that has a permeable parking lot, and yeah, that would make more sense. Thank you, Martha, for that question. Linda Rowe asks, to what extent do architecture schools emphasize sustainability in their training programs?
A lot now. I mean, I teach at IIT, although I don't teach. I mean, I teach a class based on my book, but whenever issues of sustainability come up, or the students bring them up, you can tell that they've been taught this. There's a module. There's a major. There are other things. So it's happening. I mean, more now than 30 years ago, certainly I would say. So, and I'm going to guess more.
Well, it's evolving technology, and of course, another thing is the new. There's a different group of people involved now in building a sustainable building, in designing and building a sustainable building than there used to be. It's not just the architects and the engineers and then the craftsmen, but it's scientists and different kinds of engineers and different kinds of planning. Barb Drake asks, how do you expect the pandemic and plans to keep working from home to affect building construction and remodeling plans? Do you anticipate many big city buildings will close and deteriorate?
Ooh, good question, Bernard. This is a question that devils us in Chicago every day. I read Crane Chicago Business every week, and I swear, one week it's like downtown is coming back, and the next week it's like downtown is not coming back. And because of the pandemic, what to do with all these office buildings. I was talking to some people at Gensler and SOM around midway through this pandemic so far, asking them, kind of, what do you think about what's happening? They believe that one thing that can happen, well, first of all, the picture is still emerging. We don't quite know. But I think that they believe that people are going to be asking, that workers are going to demand spaces, much like what we saw in that hospital in Singapore, where there needs to be access to open space, access to terraces, natural ventilation. That these are the things that people are going to begin to ask for. And even if it doesn't materially prevent us from having COVID, that the science and the shots will, hopefully, and the masks and all these kind of preventative things. The idea of not wanting to be, for lack of a better word, cooped up in a box with people, an air conditioned box with people. I think there's a resistance to that now. Where is that air coming from that's coming out of that vent? I mean, all that kind of thing people are asking now. So I think that new buildings are going to have to respond to this in some way. I think retrofitting existing buildings is going to have to respond to this. But I can't help but to think that we're going to see, I don't know, that's a hard question to ask, the longer term effects. After 9/11, every architecture critic in the world was saying will never go back to tall buildings, will never build tall buildings again because they're all targets. And then, within a handful of years, we're building the tallest buildings we've ever built, both globally and locally.
Kind of along that line in the last question, I wondered, Bennett invited you to give this lecture a little over a year ago, before the pandemic hit. And so I had a certain idea of what you would talk about. And then the pandemic hit and we all had to be away from each other and we weren't gathering together. And I wondered what that will do, if we have any way of anticipating what that will do to plans for these really large buildings and for the sort of large communities that are planned where people don't have to go far. They don't have to drive to get their groceries or to get their entertainment because it's all within walking distance. Are we going to be afraid now to gather in that way?
Well, it seems like the answer to that would be yes, but then you go down on a warm day to the lakefront here in Chicago, and you would think it was 2017 again. I mean, they're running about, they're congregating, they're not masked, which is not the best thing. So I think there's a natural desire to want to get together, at least for a substantial portion of the population. I think that there's going to be more validity for what's been called the 15-minute city, which actually is the way we used to live a century ago, where everything is walkable, where I'm not necessarily having to catch a train or a bus or get inside that jelly bean of a car to drive someplace, to be inside some air-conditioned mall, breathing Lord knows what and getting breathed on me by Lord knows who. That maybe I want to walk around the corner and buy my suit or buy my soup or whatever it may be. So I think, and there's this concept, Gensler and others have been talking about the 15-minute city where everything is close to you. That's how things were. You would go to 63rd and Halsted, 79th and Stony, whatever, to buy your stuff. You weren't driving out to the suburbs to buy your stuff. And I think there could be a return to that.
And Ed Berry and Marilyn Leyland and others in the audience will remember exactly when, but about 15 years ago, Peoria was looking at that idea too, whether that should be the revitalization plan for downtown, to create these pockets of communities. And there was quite a bit of discussion, and then we've gone a slightly different way. Mm-hmm. There is a question about, given the migration shifts that are happening, and will that increase, actually, will migration shifts increase as certain areas become too hot for human habitation?
Certainly, and certainly you see it happening in other continents where clearly there are climate refugees. And with that isn't just the heat; it's the heat and the food
water
dry up and the water dries up, and you move where you can get it. But I think that's going to be the thing of the next century. That it'll always be war creating refugees. But I think in addition to that, there are going to be climate refugees, people who are coming up from parts of South America to come up to the northern parts of America, people coming up from Mexico to come here because they want to live. And I think parts of Africa are already experiencing this kind of thing. And I think there'll be more of that.
And parts of India are dealing with more and worse cyclones, and not being able to, and I think other parts of Asia as well, not being able to return to their homes that are too close, and of course too close to the water. And of course there's some concern even about our coastlines, San Francisco, LA, New York, that as the ocean levels are rising, eventually that will have an impact.
It certainly will. And then the maps are frightening when you look at them. I mean, you see parts of Florida and parts of the East Coast, over the next, 100 years or so that are clearly going to be, or at least the prediction is they're clearly going to be underwater.
Diane Brown is reminding us that Naomi Davis, who started the Blacks in Green project on Chicago's South Side, spoke in Peoria 3 years ago. And you must know Naomi,
Oh,
perhaps.
Naomi is fantastic. Naomi is actually in my book, Southern Exposure, and she describes this part of the city where you can find this unexpected green space. Her description for it is worth the price of the book. But Naomi, yeah, indeed.
There's the book again.
Naomi is a good friend and does good things here. Yeah.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions showing up here. I think a good discussion. I think you've given us some new ways to think about the future and to think about how we look at the land around us and what our